No, I don't think I really want to talk about myself. Firstly, I'd like to dedicate this talk to my teacher Blanche and to Isan Dorsey, who was one of the founders here, and to John King, my dear Dharma brother. The reason I wouldn't like to talk about myself is that would kind of bring me into the forefront. And as those of you know who come to my talks, I don't write them or think them out beforehand, so I don't particularly like to have myself right there in the front of things. It gets in the way, you know. And of course that brings us right to the Four Noble Truths. I guess that someone already reviewed those a few weeks ago, but I thought you might enjoy the Scottish version. So the Four Noble Truths, as you know, came to the historical Buddha when he or she sat under a tree and wanted to find the way to end or lessen the suffering of all of us. So it's said that what arose, was the first noble truth, which is, it's always something. It's always something. And then the second noble truth is, why is it always something? The third noble truth, does it have to always be something? And the fourth noble truth, of course, is the path to get rid of that something, or at least to be able to deal with that something a bit better. Of course, the official word for the something is dukkha, suffering. And I think that's Pali, but I'm not really an expert on that. Dukkha. And the interesting thing about dukkha is that it always has sukha with it. Suffering and joy coming up together. So it was kind of interesting to be asked to talk about part of the path, the eightfold path, the way out of suffering. And right speech, right action, right livelihood. I guess the first thing that has to be said is that we're not saying right as in right and wrong. We're Buddhists, we're not some other religion, and we don't actually have, to my way of seeing it, we don't actually have such strict rules laid down. Right, this is wrong. That's very dualistic. So when I was studying myself, I thought of it as fruitful instead of right and wrong. Fruitful action or fruitful speech. Now, most religions have some way of helping us to shape our ethics, helping us to shape the wisdom side of things, and helping us really in everyday action. And I think this is very much what we're talking about here, feet on the ground kind of stuff. So I thought what was really important was, if we're going to talk about fruitful speech, we'd have to understand how the mind works. I thought that might be the kind of a very basic understanding that would come before looking at how to conduct yourself properly or how to speak properly. Because in actual fact, we create our worlds with our minds. And there's a very interesting way to look at it, and if you want to look at it in more detail, you can read about the Yogacara school, or mind-only school. But to give a very simple explanation of it, this is how it's seen, one way of looking at how we function in the world. So the first part of the mind is seen as the five sense organs, or vijnanas, if you would like the correct word, plus the sixth one, which is mind, or sita. So the mind begins when we encounter something, and with our senses begin to take that in, so to speak. Then there are two rather interesting parts. Something called the manas, which is rather like the secretary sitting at the desk, seeing all this information coming in. The manas has to then decide, well, am I going to do something with that information? That is influenced by what's known as the storehouse. Now, this is where it gets very intriguing. The storehouse is said to be where the seeds of all our actions, thoughts, everything we do lie. If you see a picture of it, it's kind of amusing. It looks like a little bag and it's got little seeds in it. So this is an attempt to understand how our mind functions and how our mind creates the world. So for example, if I walk up and hit you on the back of the head, right, that's not a very fruitful action. Right? And I've done that action, I take that in, it goes into my little storehouse. Now the next time I see you and you have that same look on your face, that action might come back out of the storehouse. It's my memory in other words. Oh, there he is, I must hit him on the top of the head again, on the back of the head again. So, in other words, it's seen that we take in, we have response to everything that's going on, then it stays with us, and the next time we encounter a similar situation, it comes right back out in there as speech or thought or action. So that's a very, very quick explanation of how our mind works and how our mind creates the world. Because after all, if we're forever bringing things out of our memory, then we're not living in this very moment. And we're not meeting everyone fresh. And yet, I can't look at this stick and just keep it at stick. Usually we look at something, oh, I like that. Oh, that's so lovely. I used to have a stick like this years ago. It's very hard for us just to leave things alone without editing our world. So, we have a chance to do something about the way we keep projecting out into the world, the way we keep having to go back to memory to describe anything, the feeling of having to go back into the storehouse in order to be able to live, in order to be able to create this world that's around us. So it's that's a very, very simple explanation of it, but basically you see the information comes in, there's a decision made, and then the storehouse part is, I guess, what might be seen as one of those Buddhist belief things. It would be very hard for me to pull out proof in a paperwork kind of way and say this is how it works. But remember that all of this information has simply been gathered over hundreds of years with people sitting observing how the mind works, how we create our reality. So whatever we decide to bring out to this world, then that is the reality we create. In fact, modern psychology, I gave a talk on perception at MCC Church, and I looked at the latest thinking on how the mind operates and how our perceptions operate in the world. And it was very interesting because it said there is actually nothing out there. We are actually bringing everything up from memory and creating it out there. There is actually nothing there that we haven't created, that we haven't brought out from ourselves. So you can see that in as much as if I treat you kindly, you might treat me kindly, and then the world has a little bit of kindness going along in it. So basically whatever I'm bringing out from myself into the world becomes my world. So then we have to look at what we're doing that way. So that's where we come to the idea of right speech, right action, right livelihood. Not as in, this is the right way to do it. Right speech is very interesting because if you look at the Buddhist precepts, there are 4 of them which talk about right speech. The guidelines for living a harmonious life. I brought a few different versions here. Let's see. Let's see, yes, right speech, right action. What happened to my... there we are. In fact, often it's said that all the precepts are one precept. It's all not creating evil and practicing good. We could say that would be the guideline for speech and action and thought and livelihood also. Life is non-killing. Now, that's an interesting one around speech, non-killing. People tend to look at that precept and say, oh wait, no, that's about killing. I've gone out and killing someone. But killing is part of right speech also, because if I badmouth Albert, I'm killing his reputation. So speech, in particular if you think of it in a monastic environment, which is where all these things arose in the first place, what could be more destructive to a community, say to a sangha, than going behind people's backs and saying things about them, spreading things around that are actually killing part of that person. So that's why there are 4 different precepts around speech. Self and other are one. Actualize harmony. Do not defile. So very much a kind of prohibition on how we speak. And yet, if prohibitions and punishment, that kind of training worked, wouldn't be a very fruitful way forward, I think. Instead of looking at what we're prohibited, the precepts are called the prohibitory precepts, things that are not good to do. Well, I would suggest we rather look at things that are good to do, such as right speech. So we come right back to, well, what exactly does that mean? I have a terrible memory, so I always I keep it on my fingers. So, is it kind, is it helpful, is it necessary, is it timely, is it true? So before you speak, if you consider, is it kind, is it helpful, is it necessary, is it timely, is it true, well, there we have noble silence. It's quite a lot to consider, isn't it, before you open your mouth. So I would suggest we could just go with perhaps the first one. Before you speak, take that moment, am I going to say something that is kind? Well, that also could take you quite a long time to figure out. There's tough love, there are times when it's important to point out even someone's mistake. For example, they asked the historical Buddha, would he ever point out people's mistakes rather than just kindly keep on encouraging them? And he said, well, it's like if you have a baby and it has a sharp object in its mouth. You want to pull that out, even it might cut the baby's lip, but it's better than letting the baby swallow it. So, that produced a few blank stares. In other words, yes, there are occasions when one has to step forward and say something that might be challenging. But it's very important to look at your own motivations. That's one thing. Why am I saying this? Am I saying this so that I feel better? Am I saying this so that I sound right? What's the motivation behind what you're saying? So as you can see, you could kind of endlessly go round in the mind, on this subject, to the point where you would be kind of tongue-tied. So I feel like I just keep giving the same talk over and over, because what I was about to say was, again, to me, it all comes down to zazen, to mindfulness. Of course, you can't stand around for half an hour figuring it out before you open your mouth. But if you can practice your mindfulness 24/7, then you will already be in that place of practicing right speech. You will already be in a place to judge, is this right livelihood or not? Or is this a fruitful action or not a fruitful action? Now, when I say practice zazen 24/7, I'm simply talking about paying attention. As you know, I work out on the streets a lot and have groups in parks and different things like that. And I also give monastic training to anyone who's interested in full monastic training outside of the monastery. So how do we create a container for that if we don't have a monastery or a temple or even a zendo to work in? And one of the most important ways to create that container is to practice 24/7, because that would be what you would have the opportunity to do where you're living in a monastery. So why not do that here in the monastery without walls? So very much a matter of focus of attention. I often give the example of the power of thought. That we pay so much attention to everything that's going on up here, blah, 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 blah. And yet it actually has no power unless it's something that we believe in. So for example, I could sit here for days, weeks and years and think that I'm a short, thin, blonde woman, but no. It doesn't happen that way. But thought, when it arises, of course, can end up coming out of our mouths. So I mean, it's not as though right speech and right thought are something separate. The thought, of course, gives rise to what you say. And of course, the whole thing is constantly churning out, as we said earlier, from these memories that we keep. So what's the practical way to work with this? It's all very well to have some kind of understanding of how it operates and to make our best effort on every moment, but how does it work in the 24/7 full-time manner? How can you possibly practice 24/7 without wearing yourself out? Well, again, focus. I noticed that the older I get, the more simple I become. And I find myself just teaching things like glasses meditation, you know. When I want to focus on something, I can take this off and hope that the left lens doesn't drop out like it did before. And, contemplate my glasses and how useful they are and put them back on, and that's a few moments of glasses meditation. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of mindfulness that I'm talking about. Something that's just plain and everyday. Not some special practice where you have to wear some funny looking outfit and sit and stare at the floor. Although of course that's helpful to practice together that way. But everyday practice when you're drinking a cup of tea, when you're walking to catch the bus, when you're sitting listening. Listening meditation is a great one. Great one to practice for the fruitful mind state. Because often when we're sitting listening, we're agreeing or disagreeing, you know, but we're not just actually listening and letting it come in. So that is my advice, to move forward into right speech, right action, right livelihood, is to start with the everydayness, with the every moment mindfulness. That slows things down a wee touch and allows you to actually come from what you might call your better nature. However, it wouldn't be a very good discussion of this if we just looked at one side of things. So I found this wonderful article called Gossip Boy, and it's in a tricycle from this summer, and it's all about, is gossip really such a bad thing? So in order to present a balanced viewpoint, and this man is so obviously gay.
I don't like that.
And he starts off with the headline, a quote from Oscar Wilde, so that kind of gave me a clue as well. The only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. Right. So I won't sit and read the whole thing, but this is in favour of gossip. So he starts off, I love gossip, I love to hear it, I love to spread it. And most of all, I love to be its subject. Its subject, target and victim. In fact, I actively cultivate and disseminate disinformation about myself and others. Especially when I find myself in the confines of a retreat. Which is to gossip what a petri dish is to bacteria. Unless, of course, it's a silent retreat. Because when it comes to the sterile lab work of the mind, there's nothing more exciting than an uncontrolled experiment using live cultures. The way I look at it, if people are so bored that they're talking about me in the first place, I'd much rather they unwittingly spread half-truths and distortions than repeat a dull litany of trivia and plodding indisputable facts. Yes, I know that gossip is rotten, but then for the most part so are we. Isn't it refreshing? Which is why you can spare me the po-faced, hand-wringing sermons about right speech. I hope I didn't do a po-faced hand-wringing sermon. Noble silence and all the rest of them. Those are some fancy ideals, but I call them like I see them. And isn't there some famous Dharma exhortation to start where you are? My point entirely. Our minds can't resist chatter, our thoughts flow naturally towards the gutter. And forming opinions based on little or no information is as natural to us as breathing. Sharing those opinions and thoughts is merely the way we justify having them in the first place. This being the case, we might as well make the best of a bad job and ensure that gossip at least fulfills its function, which is to titillate, entertain, and generally cause envy, disdain, outrage, and, if it's really juicy, awe. So then he goes on to say how gossip gets a bad rap. And he says actually it's basically neutral anyway. The factors that colour gossip that make it right or wrong are motivation and result, which is just what we were saying about right speech, and just what I was saying about right speech. So actually I find this a highly entertaining article. And one thing that we have to be very careful of in Buddhism is fixed views. That there's a right way and a wrong way. So with right speech, right livelihood, if we look at the older teachings, they do come across rather as kind of proscriptions. Let me just... Yeah, right speech is the first principle of ethical conduct in the Eightfold Path. Ethical conduct is viewed as a guideline to moral discipline. But this kind of thing is kind of... It can sound very off-putting, which is why I brought the magazine. Abstain from false speech and don't tell deliberate lies. Abstain from slanderous speech. Abstain from idle chatter. That lacks purpose. Be very quiet. It's interesting that actually when you think about it, conversation used to be quite an art form. And I really feel that since the mass media, we've lost that art form to quite a large extent. Anywho, just the word idle chatter, it's perhaps the word idle that gets us. You know, given us in America, time is money. As soon as someone opens their mouth, well, that's... you know. So again, these are seen as kind of ethical principles, but principles, precepts, moral conduct, none of those things should be imposed from the outside. I mean, we didn't all fight to be ourselves and be gay and fabulous just so that someone could tell us from the outside what we should do and how we should conduct ourselves. So we need to be able to do that from the inside, which again brings me back to everyday mindfulness and mindfulness in the moment. No one can tell you what the right action is for you. No one can tell you what your right livelihood is. So again, coming back to principles, developing one's own principles, watching what arises, watching as you speak, can inform your development, you know, your future development. So it's a matter of mindfulness, rather than this is the right way to do this and this is the right way to do that. Here's the kind of formal definition of right livelihood. Right livelihood means that one should earn one's living in a righteous way, and that wealth should be gained legally and peacefully. Wealth should be gained legally and peacefully. The Buddha mentions 4 specific activities that harm other beings and that one should avoid for this reason. So these are the kind of prescriptions here. Number 1, dealing in weapons. Number 2, dealing in living beings, including raising animals for slaughter, as well as slave trading. Number 3, working in meat production and butchery. They're all so obvious, aren't they? And number 4 is selling or using intoxicants and poisons, such as alcohol, and I added to that bad TV shows. Pardon?
Of which there are.
Yes, we have a plethora of them. So when I kind of came right down to it, I ended up simply looking at how we can do this in an everyday way. To do it in a way that doesn't make it into something special, something exotic, but a way that can particularly build us as a community, build us as a sangha, and a way that we can nurture each other. So simply mindfulness just kept arising for me. And then this poem from Rumi came, and I believe we have a few lovers of Rumi here, so I copied this one. And this to me speaks to our everyday practice and the way that can inform every part of our lives, and in fact create our lives, create the world we live in. This is called Only Breath. I'm not going to read it if you're going to keep coughing.
I have to consider this point.
Is that right cough or not right cough?
It's inappropriate.
No. Just natural. Only breath. Not Christian or Jew or Muslim. Not Hindu, Buddhist, Sufi or Zen. Not any religion or cultural system. I'm not from the east or from the west. Not out of the ocean or up from the ground. Not natural or ethereal. Not composed of elements at all. I do not exist. am not an entity in this world or in the next, did not descend from Adam and Eve or any origin story. My place is placeless, a trace of the traceless, neither body or soul. I belong to the beloved, have seen the two worlds as one, and that call to and know first, last, outer, inner, only that breath, breathing human being. Of course, one of the most important aspects of right speech that must be mentioned before I'd like to open this up for discussion and questions and so forth. But one thing that's very, very important in right speech is the way we talk to ourselves. Quite a few of us have gone through difficult backgrounds. It's not always easy to grow up being gay, and that can just be an additional problem to many others one might encounter growing up. And often one is left with the feeling that there's something wrong with oneself, that you might notice the way that you talk to yourself. When you do something and it's mistaken, do you call yourself stupid? Do you talk kindly to yourself? Do you, for example, I lost my disabled bus pass on the way here. Took me 20 minutes to stop looking in my pockets. But it was interesting. I looked in Zazen to see if I was beating myself up for losing it, or, you know, calling myself stupid, or was I even worrying about it? No, I wasn't. Because, as you know, in our Zazen, we just simply sit on the breath, and you can pull away from bothersome thoughts like that, till they get fed up and go off home. So, this is very important. How do you talk to yourself? Are you kind to yourself? Because that, after all, is the basis. It's kind of a wee bit hypocritical to walk around being nice to other people and kind and loving, and then when you get home with yourself, you're not. And that, more than almost anything, can create your outside world. How you feel about you, how you talk to you, how you relate to you. So, kindness, loving kindness to yourself is very, very important. A very quick story about Blanche, my teacher, when she was about to become abbess. And they asked her to be abbess, the first woman to be an abbot in San Francisco Zen Center. And she was considering herself, and, you know, was she ready for such a position? And she realized that she didn't always talk kindly to herself. There was part of herself that she didn't actually accept. And as those of you who know her, she's a very strong woman, very strong. So the part of her that she didn't like very much was the needy part, who she would visualize as a kind of small needy child. So she knew that she could not be abbess of a Zen center and give care and love and kindness to other people till she had fixed that out in herself. So she actually went into therapy specifically to deal with that part that she did not care for. Because she noticed, she mentally would, oh, be quiet, oh, that's so weak, oh, you know, get behind me, little kid, you know, go away, go away. And you can't do that to yourself. Anything you push away that you can't embrace will just come up and bite you. So that was, to me, was a stunning example of someone who obviously was very, very developed in their spiritual practice, and yet spotted that one thing that had to be fixed before she could live a life of loving kindness. So excuse me, in your daily mindfulness, try to be aware of how you're speaking to yourself. And let the kindness come this way first, so that it can come out and be shared with the world.